Hello everybody, welcome to the Wonky Angle, where I talk about electronic music, both new and old. And today, this is a very overdue review of the latest album from Gabriel Lamar, Among Trees, I Want to Live. This is a review I've been sitting on for quite a while now. This isn't the first time I've talked about German techno and downtempo artist Gabriel Lamar. Of course, last year I did 2 videos discussing his work, first on his last solo album Flashin' On, and then later an album he did as part of the group Safi Brothers, The Quality of Being One. I will link both reviews in the description, and I'm not going to do an in-brief segment this time because I already did that in the Flashin' On review. This is his 16th album to date, if I got that correctly, so I don't really have time to go back through everything again at the moment. But there's a lot of great stuff to his name, and I've been a fan for a long time. Both of the albums I reviewed got very high marks for me back when I covered them, though I'll admit both of them have also ended up cooling on me after my videos went up. While I love the styles explored and the super high-level production quality, I never got a super strong urge to return to them after I was done for whatever reason. Flashin' On, I guess, was a bit one-note, and The Quality of Being One felt a bit too overly long for its own good. This latest album, though, Among Trees I Want to Live, was a little different. Like the last two, I discovered it really late. It came out all the way back in May, and I didn't even know of its existence until September. And on first listen, I loved this thing, maybe even significantly more so. But on my next 3 listens or so, I kinda ended up feeling like I wouldn't have enough to say on it for a proper review, decided I'd probably just give it a shout out as an honorable mention on the year-end list, because I did really like that first listen. But what was different this time is that over the past few months, I've kept returning to this one. Something about the pacing and variety here was just particularly well done. It may not be the most out-of-the-box dub techno out there, he's done more than a couple of albums in this style before, but this one kept me coming back. I felt compelled to cover it, so let's just get into it. For the most part, this is pretty standard dub techno, following the kinds of sleek and refreshing grooves that Lamar can usually deliver. But each of these 8 tracks has kind of had its own unique flavor to help keep things interesting, and the inspiration being taken from the atmosphere of being in the forest and surrounded by natural environments. I think that atmosphere actually comes across pretty well across the board and helps set it apart from other previous releases of his. The opener, Regenerative, for instance, alongside a pretty subtle techno groove, is accompanied by mostly some fast acoustic guitar strumming and a pretty memorable progression of flanging synth guitar chords. And while I wasn't huge on it at first, it kinda sticks in the head and does a good job of setting the tone for what you'll be getting into later down the line. Besides the length, though, it's a little under 5 minutes, and all the other tracks here at least break the 8 or 9 minute barrier. Some like the next track, Imagination Creates, going up to 11 minutes. That track is admittedly one of the least interesting for me. The sound play is pretty standard and plain by his standards, but again, it is a very solid and straightforward dub techno track that never gets stale over its long running time. The beat is really subtle, but really tight, and the smooth but somewhat choppy textures around it only help to make the track become all the more danceable. The Living Green similarly follows a somewhat standard dub techno formula, but the synth textures are a lot lighter and sunnier and more refreshing. There's a lot of subtle electric guitar sounds for that little bit of psychedelic edge. Things do get changed up a bit for Wisdom of Resistance, which mainly runs at like half the tempo of everything else here. And this is one of those tracks where that forest-inspired feel really comes across among the best. I think there's even field recordings of like crickets and insects buzzing around throughout much of it, as well as some kind of dramatic Indian drone synth pad that creates a really similar effect. But the meditative beats and textures are really captivating, slow but continually keeping my interest with its bubbly synths, organic drum textures, and occasional other subtle sounds like flutes and guitars, and even some wordless female voices every now and then, because why not? Oh yeah, and it just happens to be 13 minutes long, but it really doesn't feel like that. I was never bored, or felt like, oh, this feels like it's been going on too long now. Electric Leaves, meanwhile, is admittedly not as big a standout either, but it's a really nice one too. Somewhere between like a Cameron Limbrick or Sounds from the Ground type track with its subtle downtempo synth grooves and, say, The Orb's Towers of Dub. very similar drum beats with reverb-covered rim tapping, though instead of harmonicas you have a lot of psychedelic flanging guitar textures. There's a lot of guitars all over this album, but I really like the use of it in pretty much every context. So yeah, really leaning into the dubbiest of sounds on this one, and while I've heard a lot of stuff that sounds just like it, it's still very enjoyable. Days in the Tree, I think, had a much more unique sounding execution. The shuffling, half-acoustic sounding beat, along with a set of subtle, mysterious synths. Meanwhile, there's so many other weird textures flying around from some much more Middle Eastern sounding guitar textures, like I don't know what you'd call it, like a mandolin, oud, maybe some sitar in there too, and some occasional elephant-like wailing noises. There's a bit of a funkier edge too, with some tiny little guitar licks around the edges. It all creates this very exotic and intriguing atmosphere that again does kind of create that forest feel, I guess. One of the biggest standouts from here, for sure, when I first heard it, I was really blown away by how interesting and out of the box it sounded, while still very much sticking to the sound of the rest of the album. Network of Life is a bit more standard and kind of more like Imagination Creates, very electronic heavy, but this time around I found the grooves a lot more stimulating. There's like a moody pad of all these plinking synths underneath, a kind of jumpy and repetitive but hypnotic lead melody that stuck with me, and other slightly more abrasive and wiry synths that come in later on. Sets us some very scintillating ambient techno here. I can't use that word without going like scintillating. Sorry. Finally, Outside of Time is our closer, and that's a pretty apt title as it plays with the time signatures a little bit. I think the main pulse of this track is like in 6/8 or 12/8 or something, mainly a triplet-focused beat, but it's the kind of track that kept me guessing as to where the pulse was actually supposed to be. Like, felt like it changed up 3 different times, even though it didn't really. Just happened to have textures that lined up with certain beats and caught me off guard, and it started with one that was on a, like, kind of going off sync and with a different tempo or something. And this, by the way, is a good thing. It's easily the least conventional sounding track on here. Also, the refreshing set of 808 beats, guitars, and synth textures certainly don't hurt either. It's light and calm in some moments and more propulsive and driving in others. It's a really interesting way to go out. So that's Among Trees I Want to Live. While maybe not the most unconventional sounding album out there, it's straight dub techno first and foremost, and mainly follows formulas I've heard several times before. But the way it goes about exploring all these facets of Lamar's style in a way that's continually investing, and the way it's paced so that no track overstays its welcome in spite of their lengthy running times, and that each track has its own unique feel and sound, while still adhering to a formula and atmosphere to bring it all together, I just don't really know what else to say. It's really something else. I think this is one of my favorite albums I've heard from Gabriel Lamar to date. It's already had much more longevity than either Flash and On or The Quality of Being One, and while how much of a visceral reaction it gets out of me varies from listen to listen, it's still one that I had fun with from start to finish. It delivers on so many things that I love in dub techno and downtempo. And heck, if you've never heard a Gabriel Lamar album before or was previously intimidated by his huge back catalog, you may as well start here. I think this one neatly sums up the kinds of sounds and styles he usually explores, and would make for a good jumping on point if you've never heard anything of his before. So, yeah, this is one of my favorite albums of 2018, probably going to be on my year-end list in a few weeks, and I would definitely recommend giving it a shot. I'm overall feeling an 8.3 out of 10. But of course, this is just my opinion. You can feel free to disagree with it. But I'd like to hear your thoughts, so leave the comments in the comment thing down there. Shout out to my Patreon supporters. There are some people you want to add yourself to that list or make me a review of something. Link to my Patreon is in the description. But yeah, that's pretty much it. That's all for today. See you next time.